Tensions rise as we approach the upcoming presidential election and as our country navigates the ongoing activities around the world. Understanding what impacts how we live directly involves our government. We will start a three-part series of Government 101 with a discussion on the different types of government. Also in this program, Dr. Pam Straker will discuss the reality of being a caregiver and offer encouragement for all of you who are caregivers. We begin with understanding our government. Joining us to discuss this is Professor Wallace Ford of Medgar Evers. Professor Ford, welcome to Brooklyn 45.
Well, thank you so much. It's good to be back again. Yes.
How knowledgeable do you think our community is on the structure of government?
On a scale of 1 to 10, maybe around 2. 10 being very well versed, around 2, 3 at the most. And that's not just our community. That's the I assume we're talking about the American community. It is. I teach this courses dealing with this, and I'm always astounded at how graduates of high school can come, and enrolled in college, are not aware of just the basics in terms of what the government is, what it does, how it's structured, and how it impacts on our lives. So I know it's a long answer to your question, but I think it deserves that elaboration because it's not just in our community, it's the American community. And when you have a lack of understanding, you get the kind of chaos that we have in the country right now.
You talked about pre-college. In what part of the educational system do you think the study of government should be introduced to students?
4th or 5th grade at the latest.
Why 4th to 5th grade?
Because it's never too early to learn the basic structure of the government, which controls all aspects or affects all aspects of our lives. And ignorance is something that demagogues take advantage of all of the time, and whatever political stripe you want to speak of. And knowledge, it's an old saying, but it really is true. Knowledge is power. And if you understand how government works, then perhaps you can have an opportunity to make the appropriate asks and demands and expectations. But if you don't know how government works, then then you're not at the table. And if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that's kind of where we see ourselves these days.
We're doing a series on government, and we are starting this series with an introduction to the various types of government. Most residents of the United States are just familiar with one or two types, the democratic system and the communist system. So let's talk about the other popular types of government.
Well, yes, and I think it's important in terms of context. The notion of a democratic government is really rather new in the context of thousands of years of human history. And so this notion that people actually get to participate in electing people who are ostensibly going to affect their interests and is new in the sense of history. And we're only talking about the last couple of hundred years. I think that it's important to understand that the kinds of government that we've seen over the thousands of years, over the millennia, really have to do with a small group of individuals having control over a much larger group of individuals, either by force or by edict or by religion or tradition, as we see, for example, in the United Kingdom. And so it is important to understand that this notion of democracy is really very new, and it's still a work in progress, to say the least.
What are the characteristics of these types of governments? You've talked a little bit about the democratic government here in the United States, but what are the characteristics of the other types of government, some you mentioned just now?
Well, okay, fine. So, for example, you have governments that are based on some type of monarchy, royalty, or just people who are in a permanent ruling class. And in those situations, people have little or no say in what goes on, or if they do, their choices are fairly limited. We have socialist, and I'd put that in quotes, notions, because it's not so much a socialist distribution of resources as a matter of, again, some type of major power at the executive levels, and other people kind of have to go along with that. Religion gets mixed up with this in many instances, and so people believe that it's a religious basis for certain types of structures, governmental structures, and governments that are based on religion, in many instances, wind up being able to justify almost any actions that they take in the name of religion, which is not peculiar to the Judeo-Christian religions, or certainly to Islamic traditions or the Hindu traditions. You see it across the world. And so this idea of democracy, while it is extremely important, and I believe useful in terms of human conducting human relations in a governmental sense, it is relatively new, and it is still it's still in the training wheels are still on, to say the least. And so I give you, for example, if I might, examples where you have in the UK, for example, you have a monarchy, but they're no longer in any major kind of control, but they still have some type of quasi-religious impact. You look at some of this, the People's Republic of China, for example, which is a communist regime. What is most distinguished, however, is the fact that while people do have an opportunity to vote, their voting options are very limited to one party. And so you have those kinds of situations.
What about the Asian countries?
Well, as I mentioned, China, for example, you can look at Korea, South Korea. North Korea is an absolute dictatorship. South Korea is a putative democracy, as is Japan. Keeping in mind that Japan, until about 75, 80 years ago, was a monarchy. And of course, after the war, that did change at World War II. And so we do see in Asia an adaptation of the kind of strong monarchist ruling government. Even in a place like India, India is considered to be the largest democracy in the world, along with the most populated country at this point in the world, more than China. You have one major party that controls the 85, 90% of the seats in their legislative bodies and what have you, and one leader, Modu, and that's pretty much all you have at this point. Now, one can say, yeah, but it's a democracy; people get to vote. But if you don't, if your options to vote are limited, one can question that particular characterization.
Talk a little bit about the type of governments in Latin America, for example, and even in the Caribbean.
Okay. Okay, and I'm sure we won't forget Africa along the way. But in Latin America, again, you have, as we have here in the United States, descendants of a colonial regime. Okay, what we know, all of the countries that we see in Latin America, and of course here in the United States, are all descendants of a colonial regime. The bodies that were put in place were putatively democratic, but then one thing, as they say, kind of leads to another, and in some places you have less of a democracy than others. You have I have to say interference is the only best word I can use of the United States for its own political and economic purposes, guiding how many of these countries will go forward. In Central America, we see it very much so, which is a source of a lot of the so-called immigration problem today. This is not what we're going to talk about right now, I know, but it is. Just put a little asterisk on that. Perhaps we can talk about it another time. You see countries like Brazil and Argentina going back and forth between military dictatorships and a democracy, and that pendulum continues to swing. The Caribbean, of course, all of the countries in the Caribbean are colonial descendants, and you see in many instances. You see in many instances, those countries, still follow. They consider themselves part of the Commonwealth, the so-called Commonwealth, and the participation of. And I've spent a good bit of time, not just as a tourist in the Caribbean, but also working in the Caribbean and working with various governments as an attorney. And you still see very, very clear ruling classes, really kind of across the board in the Caribbean. So yes, you have democracy again, but you have certain families or certain groups of individuals are pretty much in that ruling class going forward. So democracy, yes, complete democracy. One can have a discussion with respect to that. If I might, going over to Africa, again, we have colonial descendants. And what we have in Africa, more so than in the Caribbean, I might add, Dr. Taitt, is that for very clear geopolitical, but most importantly, economic reasons, even though these countries are, quote, independent, they're still wedded to their European former rulers. And of course, the United States is in the game now, and China is in the game now. And in all of those instances, even though these countries are so-called independent, they are very much tied to their so-called mother country. And I remember, if I might just real quickly, I attended a conference in Gabon, and Gabon is in West Africa. It's French speaking, a former French colony, but it's independent as it could possibly be. Attending a conference there, sit down in a hotel, very nice hotel for breakfast, and they're serving preserves. Okay, well, now we're in a tropical country, I understand, right? So where do the preserves come from, Dr. Taitt? The preserves come from damn France, okay, because that's still how close they are in terms of being ruled, although they are so-called independent. Africa, and the last thing we have to say with respect to Africa, of course, is that the national lines do not reflect anything in terms of the geopolitical or popular, in terms of people's where they live, what the traditions are. I mean, imagine if you took Eastern France and Western Germany and put it together as a country, you've got a real problem there. Okay, well, you multiply that by all of the 50-something countries that we have in Africa, then we see why there's such a great dysfunction, particularly when you have the so-called great powers using that dysfunction to take economic advantage of these countries and the people that live there.
Some people, I wouldn't say many people, but could be many people at this point in time, are asking this question: who determines the type of government that should be used to run a country?
Well, power is always the factor behind it. We here in the United States kind of collectively pat ourselves on the back that the foundation of the United States was a democratic aspect, and it was done with the will of the people in mind. Only males participated in that, and only males who were wealthy participated in that, and only males who were wealthy and landowners or had significant wealth participated in the Declaration of Independence and, of course, the Constitution of the United States. I teach these matters at Medgar Evers College. And when you look at who you read the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. Obviously, that's all women are not in there, are they? And the men that were included were not men that look like you or me. Yeah, and so and the Constitution itself, was not put together. The Constitution itself, included slavery as a part of the founding document of the country. So that's a long answer to your question, but I think it's important to understand that when we glorify Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, keep in mind that 8 of the first 10 presidents were slave owners. Okay, keep in mind that slavery was a part of the American tradition going up to the Civil War, and if it wasn't for the fact that the people in the South were just so obstinate with respect to any type of accommodation of the notion of slavery, we might have had slavery going right through to the 20th century. And in many ways, sadly, we did. Only we just didn't call it slavery. We called it failed Reconstruction. And here we are today.
If a country were to change from one type of government to another, what would it have to go through?
Well, in a perfect world, I guess, in a perfect scenario, given the hypothetical you're giving, that it doesn't have to involve violence, it doesn't have to involve bloodshed. Mostly, what it has to do with is two things. One is education. so that people understand that you don't have to, that you do have some basic rights as an individual, and they should be reflected in the government in which you participate. And the other is if some people weren't just so damn greedy. And I hate to put it that way, but when people see opportunities for power, and you see a ruling class in India, we see a ruling class in China, and oh yes, we see a ruling class here in the United States. So before we get too far up on our high horse, we have to understand that we do really have a ruling class here in this country, and it's economic. We have, just 1,000 billionaires, but it's more than that, of course. And the fact is that the United States is the only so-called democratic country of which I'm aware, where there's unlimited money can go into the elections. Well, if you can have unlimited money going into the elections, and of course that comes from the United States Supreme Court and all of their glory with respect to this. Once you can have billions of dollars affecting who becomes president of the United States, or who becomes governor, or who becomes mayor here in New York City, you skew the entire process. I don't have $100,000 to put into a campaign, so I hope that you do, Dr. Taitt, but I don't think that you want to be putting 100,000 of your dollars into a campaign. And why should you have to? Why should you have to? So that you can buy TV time for the candidate. Well, they provide public based TV time in France and in England, and they're not doing so bad. And how great are we doing? We elected damn Donald Trump. So it is because money is embedded so much so in the American political system. We don't have a truly democratic process. Small d.
I'm getting the wrap up, so we've got about 30 seconds left. You have a blog. Tell us about this blog in 30 seconds.
Oh, thank you very much. It's called the Point of View blog. If anybody who's interested can go to www.thewallaceford.com, and it's free. It's on a free platform, and it's written about 50, 60 countries. We've been writing for about 10 years, and what we try to do is focus on various ideas that are going on. I certainly have my own perspectives with respect to these things, but the idea is to put various issues in front of the reading public, and so we continue to do that. And thank you for the mention.
Okay, Dr. Wallace Ford, thank you very much for being our guest on Brooklyn 45, and we're going to have you back sometime in the near future.
Well, fine. I'll be ready. That's for sure. Thank you so much.
You are never too young to be a caregiver. Your parent may become ill or incapacitated, and you may choose to look after them. Or you may be the only child or family member who can. Dr. Pam Straker, Director of Operations at Brooklyn Health Disparity Center at Downstate Medical Center, is my guest. Dr. Straker, welcome to Brooklyn 45.
Well, thank you so much. And Professor Taitt and your gang, thank you for this opportunity. It's so important that we talk about this issue, and I appreciate it.
Apart from your work at Downstate and your work as an author, we're going to talk about your book in a little while, you have been taking care of your mother and father. Tell us about that.
Okay, so my history in caregiving has been long. It began actually with my involvement with some other family members, one of whom had breast cancer and really wanted to continue with her professional life. And so I was deeply involved in trying to help her continue to do that until she visited the angels. Subsequent to that, I was involved with actually the care of my mother and father. My father was the one who unfortunately suffered with dementia, and my mom was his full-time caregiver, but because of what I observed, I got involved in caring for both of them. And I often tell a story about how I came to understand that it was time for me to step up because they were having difficulty with things that before that time could accomplish with no issue at all. My father was well cared for, and subsequent to his visiting the angels, my mom then required assistance and care. And so this was over the period of over 20 years that I was engaged with this until 2 years ago when mom said she had had enough and she went home. So the caregiving in my life has been longstanding.
Talk about your book, The Heroic Caregiver.
So subsequent to my becoming a caregiver, I began to really think about what was going on. Some of the things that were happening were absolutely overwhelming and difficult, but some of the things were humorous. And I also was looking around to see what were the resources to be of assistance to me as I began to try to adjust to the fact that I was becoming a caregiver for my parents. That specifically for one's parents, it changes your life. There is a difference in the way that you go through the world when you become responsible for the lives of people who used to be responsible for you. And so that prompted me to start thinking about the book. And ultimately, I began talking to other people, and I found that there were so many people grappling with this issue. And I decided that I would write the book by gathering stories from other people who were grappling with these issues. As a psychologist, of course, I could always give my ideas about what could be done, but I had lived it and I wanted to hear how other people were dealing with it as they were living it.
Being a caregiver is a family affair. I think you mentioned that in your book as well. Explain why it is a family affair.
Well, depending upon the condition of your loved one, because this can happen, as you mentioned, early in life. There's some people who are caregivers at a much younger age than I became a caregiver. But there are many things that go into determining who is going to step up and how that person is going to step up to give care. I happen to come from a family where caregiving was an expectation, but you were prepared for it. And so the decision about which hat you're going to wear in caregiving is generally one that involves the whole family. And when I say the whole family, it involves the person who's being cared for, it involves the person who's providing, or the people who are providing the care. In many instances, there are siblings who are making decisions about which of the caregiving hats they shall wear to contribute to the process. And that's when there's a good situation. Unfortunately, there are many situations where it's not good. And certainly we can talk about where we are currently, where a lot of people are becoming older and are alone. And the idea of who's going to wear the hats of caregiving for them becomes a real issue.
You mentioned that people must plan for giving care from a very young age. How young is that? And talk about the importance of planning from very early.
Well, when I was actually finishing this book, one of my nieces asked me, should I be doing a care plan at this point? And I said, what do you think? And the answer is it starts from very, very early. There are issues that emerge in our lives that are conducive to planning. As an example, someone who is in a college setting may become ill. And when the parents go to try to get the medical information, etc., if that person who is in college but who is adult by age does not have certain documents in place, i.e. permission to see this person's medical information, it can become cumbersome. Not that you can't ultimately get it, but you need to know who's going to be in charge of your medical information, who's going to be in charge of your financial information, and the big thing at this point is who is going to take care of your online information. That's a whole new set of information that we have to start being aware of.
My final question to you, Dr. Carter, is about a caregiver legacy plan.
So the caregiver legacy plan is one where you look at the different aspects that will need to be addressed when you are providing caregiving. So it's the financial, it is the medical, it is the social, it is all of the different things that go into a person's life that must be planned.
I want to thank you for the information which you have provided. How do people get in touch with you?
You can reach me at drpamstraker.com. You can also, that is my website. You can also reach me at 917-693-6263. That is my cell phone. I can also be reached. I can be found online in a number of places. I'm on LinkedIn, my favorite site. So feel free to reach me at any one of those places.
Thank you very much for being on Brooklyn 45.
Thank you.
You also heard Professor Wallace Ford of Medgar Evers College talk about the various forms of government, including our own here in the United States. And to your viewers, we thank you for watching this program. You can watch it again on the YouTube channel. We invite you to support and partner with Brooklyn 45. We are a 501c3 program. So when you support us with a gift, you benefit and our communities benefit as well from the information we provide. Again, please tell your family, friends, and work colleagues all about Brooklyn 45. And please support and be a part of what we do. On behalf of the Brooklyn 45 team, I am Sam Taitt.
Brooklyn 45 is a 501c3 not-for-profit, and we welcome your support. Check out our website, brooklyn45.com, and feel free to donate or share it with your friends and family. Have any comments or questions? Send them to our Facebook, facebook.com/Brooklyn45TV. If you have any questions or topics you think we should cover next, shoot me an email over at brooklyn45tv@gmail.com. Thank you again for watching.